Captain Zara Thek pressed her scaled hand against the cracked viewport, watching the dying light of 3 suns paint the asteroid field in shades of amber and crimson. The mining station beneath her feet groaned under the stress of failing life support systems, each mechanical wheeze a countdown to oblivion. "How long?" she asked without turning from the window. Engineer Koss, a stout reptilian whose people had mastered space travel when humans were still discovering fire, looked up from his diagnostic pad with tired eyes. 18 hours, maybe 20 if we shut down non-essential systems. But the hegemony fleet will be here in 6. Zara's throat sac deflated in what her species used as a sigh. The Kepler Mining Consortium had been a shining example of interspecies cooperation. 12 different races working together to extract rare minerals from the treacherous asteroid belt surrounding the triple star system. Now it would become their tomb. The war had started 3 months ago when the Vorthon hegemony decided that peaceful coexistence was inefficient. Their massive dreadnoughts had swept through system after system, enslaving or destroying anyone who opposed their expansion. The news feeds spoke of entire worlds going dark, billions of lives snuffed out in the name of Vorthon supremacy. "Any word from the evacuation fleets?" Zara asked, though she already knew the answer. "The last transport jumped out 2 days ago," Koss replied, his voice hollow. "They took the civilians, the families, said they'd send help." He paused, mandibles clicking nervously. "We both know they won't risk their ships for a mining station." Zara turned from the window to face the control room where the remaining crew worked at their stations. 43 beings from 7 different worlds. All volunteers who had stayed behind to keep the station's defenses operational and buy time for the evacuation. Engineers, security officers, miners who had never held a weapon until yesterday. Lieutenant Vex, a tall insectoid whose homeworld had already fallen to the hegemony, looked up from the tactical display. Her compound eyes reflected the red warning lights that had been flashing for hours. "Long-range sensors are picking up the hegemony advance fleet. 12 ships, including 2 heavy cruisers. They'll be in weapons range in 5 hours. The crew fell silent. Everyone knew what those numbers meant. The station had a few defensive turrets designed to ward off pirates and asteroid impacts, not military vessels. Against 12 hegemony warships, they might as well throw rocks. "Why are they sending so many ships for a mining station?" asked Yorth, a young feline whose fur had turned gray with stress over the past week. "Because we hurt them," Zara said, pride creeping into her voice despite their dire situation. "When they hit the Centauri colonies, our geological surveys helped the defenders know where to make their stands. When they besieged New Avalon, our mineral analysis told them which asteroids to use as weapons. We've been feeding intelligence to the resistance for months." She moved to the central console, bringing up a holographic display of the local star map. Red markers showed hegemony positions advancing like a plague across civilized space. Blue markers, far fewer and scattered, represented the remaining free worlds and their desperate fleets. "They want to make an example of us," she continued. "Show the galaxy what happens when you defy them." Engineer Koss set down his tools and moved to stand beside his captain. "Then let's give them a show they won't forget." The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. The crew worked with grim determination, turning mining equipment into makeshift weapons, rigging explosives in critical areas, preparing for a siege they all knew they couldn't win. The station's hydroponics bay became an ammunition depot. The recreational areas were converted to medical stations. Dr. Naya, the station's aquarian physician, swam between her patients in the medical bay's specialized tanks, her bioluminescent patches pulsing with concern. Several crew members had been injured during the hasty retrofitting, but she treated their wounds with the same care she had always shown. "You should have left with the civilians," Zara told her during one of her rounds. "My people have a saying," Naya replied, her voice bubbling through the translation unit. The depth of the ocean is measured not by how far you can see, but by how far you're willing to dive. I've found my depth, Captain. As the hours ticked by, each member of the crew found their own ways to say goodbye. Yorth recorded a message for his family back on Felinar Prime. Lieutenant Vex updated her personal logs, documenting the hegemony's tactics for anyone who might find them later. Engineer Koss spent time in the station's small shrine, placing offerings before representations of a dozen different deities from as many worlds. Zara found herself back at the viewport as the sensor alarms began to sound. The hegemony fleet had arrived early, dropping out of hyperspace like hungry predators circling wounded prey. The ships were sleek and deadly, their dark hulls bristling with weapons that could crack a moon in half. "They're hailing us," Lieutenant Vex reported, her voice steady despite the tremor in her antennae. "Put them through." The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the lead hegemony cruiser. The commander was typical of his species, tall, pale, with dead black eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His uniform was pristine, decorated with medals that represented conquered worlds. "I am Admiral Koreth of the Hegemony Third Fleet," the figure spoke, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. "You will surrender your station and submit to hegemony justice. Your crimes against the state have been documented. Compliance will result in quick deaths. Resistance will not." Zara stepped forward, her own uniform rumpled and stained from the day's work, but she stood straight and proud. "I am Captain Zara Thek of the Kepler Mining Consortium. This station is sovereign territory of the Galactic Trade Federation. We reject your authority and demand you withdraw from this system." Admiral Koreth's lipless mouth curved in what might have been a smile. "The Federation is dead, Captain. Their fleets burn in a dozen systems. Their worlds kneel before hegemony rule. You are alone." "We are never alone while we choose to stand together," Zara replied, her words carrying across the station's comm system for all her crew to hear. The Admiral's expression hardened. "Very well. You have 1 hour to reconsider. After that, we will take the station by force. Your defiance ends here." The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge in silence except for the steady beep of sensors tracking the enemy fleet as it moved into attack formation. 1 hour, Koss said quietly. "What do we do with 1 hour?" Zara looked around at her crew, these brave beings from across the galaxy who had chosen to stand when they could have run, to fight when they could have surrendered. Each face showed fear, yes, but also determination. They had found something worth dying for. "We make it count," she said. "We send a message to every free world, every resistance cell, every being who still believes in something better than hegemony rule. We tell them that on this day, at this place, some people chose to stand." Lieutenant Vex's compound eyes glittered as she began transmitting on all frequencies, broadcasting their story to anyone who might be listening. Dr. Naya sealed her medical records and research data in emergency pods, hoping some of her work might survive to help others. Engineer Koss made final adjustments to the station's power core, turning their fusion reactor into the galaxy's most expensive bomb. Yorth surprised everyone by volunteering for the most dangerous job, manually targeting the defensive turrets when the automated systems inevitably failed. "My people were warriors before we reached the stars," he explained, his claws extending slightly. "Maybe it's time to remember that." As the hour drew to a close, Zara made one final tour of the station. She found crew members at their posts, ready to face impossible odds with weapons they barely knew how to use and courage they had discovered in themselves. In the mining bays, security officers checked and rechecked their improvised explosives. In engineering, technicians made final adjustments to systems pushed far beyond their design limits. "Captain," Lieutenant Vex called out, her voice tight with concentration. I'm picking up something strange on the deep space sensors. It's faint, but... What is it? I don't know. The signature doesn't match any known vessel type. It's big, though. Really big. Before Zara could respond, Admiral Korath's voice filled the bridge again. Your hour is up, Captain Thek. Prepare for boarding. The hegemony ships moved forward in perfect formation, their weapons charging with ominous energy signatures. The mining station's meager defenses powered up in response, David preparing to face Goliath with a slingshot made of hope and desperation. All crews to battle stations, Zara announced, her voice carrying throughout the doomed station. Remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for everyone who can't fight back, for every world that still dreams of freedom, for every child who deserves to grow up in a galaxy where might doesn't make right. The first hegemony missiles streaked toward them like falling stars, and Captain Zara Thek closed her eyes for just a moment, wondering if anyone would remember their last stand, if their sacrifice would mean anything in the vast darkness of space. She opened her eyes as the explosions began, and smiled grimly. They were about to find out the first salvo of hegemony missiles struck the station's outer hull like the fists of angry gods. The deck plates buckled under Zara's feet, throwing her against the command console as emergency lights bathed everything in hellish red. Through the viewport, she could see chunks of the station's mining equipment spinning away into the asteroid field, glowing cherry red from the impact. Hull breach in sections 7 through 12, Koss reported, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Emergency bulkheads are holding, but we've lost the primary communication array. Lieutenant Vex worked frantically at her station, compound eyes reflecting the cascade of warning lights. 2 of our defensive turrets are offline. The remaining 4 are tracking multiple incoming targets. She paused, mandibles clicking rapidly. Captain, that unknown contact I detected earlier, it's moving, fast, faster than anything I've ever seen. How fast? 0.7 light speed and accelerating in normal space. That should be impossible. Another wave of missiles hammered the station. The lights flickered, and somewhere in the distance, they could hear the hiss of atmosphere venting through compromised seals. Dr. Naya's voice came over the comm system, reporting casualties in the lower levels where flying debris had caught several crew members. Return fire, Zara ordered. The station's pathetic defensive turrets spoke in response, sending streams of high-energy particles toward the advancing hegemony fleet. To their credit, the weapons found their marks, but the enemy ship's shields absorbed the impacts like raindrops on a lake. It was like watching insects attack a starship. Admiral Korath's smug face appeared on the main screen again, his perfect uniform unmarked by the violence he was orchestrating. Behind him, Zara could see hegemony officers calmly going about their duties as if the destruction of an entire space station was just another day at work. An admirable effort, Captain Thek, the Admiral said with mock appreciation. Your courage is noted. However, this display of defiance has gone on long enough. Surrender now, and I will ensure your deaths are quick. Counter offer, Zara replied, wiping blood from a cut above her eye. Go back to whatever hole you crawled out of and leave civilized beings alone. The Admiral's expression hardened. Very well. Begin the assault. Take the station. The transmission ended just as a new wave of explosions rocked the mining facility. This time, the hegemony wasn't just firing missiles. They were launching boarding pods. Dozens of armored cylinders shot toward the station like bullets, each one carrying a squad of hegemony shock troops equipped with weapons that could cut through starship armor. Boarding parties inbound, Lieutenant Vex reported. Multiple breaches across all levels. They're coming for the control center. Yorth appeared at Zara's side, his feline features set in grim determination. He carried a mining laser that had been hastily modified for combat, its power cell jury-rigged to deliver devastating bursts. Security teams are in position, Captain. We'll make them pay for every corridor. The sound of combat echoed through the station's halls as the remaining crew fought desperately against trained soldiers. The defenders had courage and intimate knowledge of their home, but they were miners and engineers facing warriors bred for conquest. The outcome was inevitable, but they made the invaders work for every meter. "Captain," Koss called out, his voice tight with concentration as he worked at his engineering station. "I've got the reactor primed. If they take the control center, I can overload the fusion core, take out half their fleet along with us." Zara nodded grimly. At least their deaths would mean something. That's when Lieutenant Vex's voice cut through the chaos, carrying a note of wonder that seemed impossible given their circumstances. "Captain, you need to see this. That unknown contact, it's not just moving fast, it's big, really big, and it's headed straight for us." On the tactical display, a new icon appeared at the edge of the system. As the sensors gathered more data, the icon grew larger and larger until it dominated the entire screen. The computer struggled to process the readings, cycling through estimates that climbed from cruiser-sized to dreadnought-sized to something that defied classification. "How big?" Zara asked, her voice barely a whisper. 15 kilometers long, 4 kilometers wide," Vex replied, her compound eyes wide with disbelief. "Captain, this thing is larger than some moons. I've never seen anything like it." Through the station's remaining sensors, they watched as the massive vessel decelerated from impossible speeds, its bulk blotting out entire sections of starfield. It was dark, angular, and absolutely enormous. A mountain of metal and purpose that made the hegemony fleet look like toys by comparison. Admiral Koreth's face appeared on screen again, but this time his perfect composure had cracked. Behind him, Zara could see hegemony officers running between stations, their earlier calm replaced by frantic activity. "Unknown vessel, identify yourself immediately," the Admiral demanded, though his voice carried less authority than before. "You are entering a hegemony military operation. Withdraw or face the consequences." The response came not in words, but in action. The massive ship's hull suddenly blazed with light as hundreds of weapon ports opened along its length. Energy signatures that made the hegemony fleet's firepower look pitiful began building up across the newcomer's surface. "By the depths," Dr. Naya's voice whispered over the comm. "What is that thing?" The ship's response to Admiral Koreth came in the form of a single, measured broadband transmission that reached every vessel in the system. The voice that spoke was human, undeniably, recognizably human, but it carried an authority that made Admiral Koreth's earlier threats sound like the whimpering of a child. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Federation Warship Retribution. You have 30 seconds to cease hostilities and withdraw from this system. This is your only warning." The bridge fell silent except for the distant sounds of fighting in the station's corridors. Zara felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not because salvation had arrived, but because someone had come. Someone was standing up to the hegemony's seemingly unstoppable advance. "Terran," Koss whispered. "But humans are still limited to their own solar system. They barely have interstellar flight. Their ships are primitives compared to—" His words were cut off as Admiral Koreth's response came crackling over the comm. "This is Admiral Koreth of the Hegemony Third Fleet. Human vessel, you will withdraw immediately. This system is under hegemony authority. Your primitive technology poses no threat to—" The Admiral never finished his sentence. The human warship fired once. A single, impossibly bright beam of energy reached across millions of kilometers in an instant, striking the hegemony flagship with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. The massive cruiser simply vanished, not destroyed in an explosion, not broken apart, but completely annihilated as if it had never existed at all. The silence that followed was deafening. "By all the gods of all the worlds," Lieutenant Vex breathed, her voice filled with awe. They erased an entire heavy cruiser with one shot. The remaining hegemony ships began breaking formation, their perfect discipline crumbling in the face of power they couldn't comprehend. Some tried to flee, engaging their hyperspace drives in desperate attempts to escape. Others opened fire on the human warship, their weapons blazing in defiant fury. None of it mattered. The human ship moved through the hegemony fleet like a force of nature, its weapons speaking with casual, devastating efficiency. Ships that had terrorized entire star systems were swept aside like debris. The hegemony's vaunted military might, their carefully orchestrated invasion, their promise of inevitable conquest, all of it crumbled in minutes before the measured fury of a single human warship. But Admiral Chen wasn't finished. As the last hegemony vessel died in nuclear fire, the massive human ship turned its attention to the crippled mining station. For a moment, Zara wondered if they had simply traded one conqueror for another. Then Admiral Chen's voice filled the station's communication system, and this time it carried warmth instead of terrible authority. "This is Admiral Chen to all personnel on Kepler Station. Are you in need of medical assistance?" Zara started, then stopped, overwhelmed by emotions she couldn't name. "We have wounded. Our life support is failing. We never expected. We thought we were alone." "You're not alone," the Admiral replied, her words carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "You never were. Humanity doesn't abandon its friends." Through the viewport, Zara could see smaller ships launching from the massive human vessel, medical craft and repair ships moving toward the station with purpose and speed. But what struck her most was what Admiral Chen had said. Friends. Not allies of convenience or trading partners, but friends. "How?" Lieutenant Vex asked, voicing the question they were all thinking. "How did you find us? How did you know we needed help?" "We heard your transmission," Admiral Chen explained. "Your message about standing together, about choosing to fight for something better. It reached us through the deep space relay network, and when humanity hears that call, we answer." As the first human rescue ship docked with the station, Zara felt tears running down her scaled cheeks. They had prepared to die alone and forgotten, making one last stand against an enemy that seemed invincible. Instead, they had discovered that somewhere in the galaxy, there were still those who believed that no one should fight alone. The medical teams that boarded the station were efficient and professional, but more than that, they were kind. Dr. Naya found herself working alongside human physicians who treated her patients with the same care they would show their own people. Engineer Koss watched in amazement as human technicians restored the station's systems with technology that seemed almost magical in its sophistication. "Captain Thek," Admiral Chen's voice came over a private channel, "my medical teams tell me you have 43 brave souls on that station. Every one of them chose to stay and fight when they could have run. That's the kind of courage humanity respects." "We just did what we thought was right," Zara replied, still struggling to process everything that had happened. "That's exactly why you're worth saving," the Admiral said. "The galaxy needs more beings like your crew. People who choose to stand up when it matters." As the human ships worked to repair the station and tend to the wounded, Zara found herself looking out at the Retribution through the viewport. The massive warship hung in space like a promise. Proof that somewhere in the darkness, Guardians watched and waited to answer the call when courage needed support. She thought about Admiral Koreth's words, about how the Federation was dead and they were alone. He had been wrong on both counts. The Federation lived on in every being who chose to stand for something better, and they were never truly alone as long as courage existed in the galaxy. The hegemony had learned a lesson today, though whether they would heed it remained to be seen. They had discovered that humanity had evolved beyond their understanding. that the primitive species they had dismissed now wielded power that could reshape the balance of the galaxy. But more importantly, 43 beings from 7 different worlds had learned that sometimes, when all hope seems lost, help comes from the most unexpected places. And sometimes that help arrives in the form of humans who refuse to let their friends fight alone. 3 days after the battle, Captain Zarathek stood in what had once been the station's main conference room, now converted into a makeshift command center buzzing with activity. Human technicians worked alongside her crew, their movements precise and purposeful as they installed new equipment that gleamed with an almost ethereal beauty. The technology was so advanced it seemed to bend light around itself. Admiral Sarah Chen sat across from her, a woman who appeared deceptively ordinary despite commanding the most powerful warship Zara had ever seen. She was middle-aged, with silver streaks in her dark hair and laugh lines around intelligent brown eyes. But there was something in those eyes, a depth that spoke of experiences beyond imagination. "The repairs to your station will be complete within 6 hours," Admiral Chen said, reviewing a holographic display that materialized between them. "We've also upgraded your defensive systems. The hegemony won't catch you unprepared again." Zara studied the technical specifications floating in the air. The new weapons and shields were generations ahead of anything she understood. "This technology, it's beyond what any species in the known galaxy possesses. How did humanity advance so far, so quickly?" Admiral Chen's expression grew thoughtful. "That's a complicated story. The short version is that we had help, and teachers who made us understand that with great power comes even greater responsibility." Before Zara could ask what she meant, the conference room door opened to admit Dr. Naya, her bioluminescent patches pulsing with excitement. The Aquarian physician had spent the past 3 days working with the human medical teams, and the collaboration had produced remarkable results. "Captain," Dr. Naya said, her voice bubbling with enthusiasm through the translation unit, "you need to see what they've done for our wounded. Yorth's injuries from the boarding action, they've completely healed them. Not just patched up, but actually regenerated damaged tissue. And poor Engineer Koss's radiation exposure from the reactor leak, they've reversed the cellular damage entirely." Admiral Chen smiled warmly. "Our medical technology has advanced considerably in recent years. We've learned that healing is often more important than fighting." "But the weapons," Lieutenant Vex interjected from her position at the new tactical station. Her compound eyes reflected the data streams flowing across multiple screens. "The power you demonstrated against the hegemony fleet. How is such destruction possible?" The Admiral's expression grew somber. "Because we learned that sometimes, to protect those who cannot protect themselves, you must be prepared to face any threat. The universe can be a dark place, filled with those who see compassion as weakness. We chose to ensure that calculation would always be wrong." Zara leaned forward, her throat sac inflating with curiosity. "You speak as if humanity has faced something worse than the hegemony." "We have," Admiral Chen said quietly. "Much worse. The hegemony is merely the latest in a long line of would-be conquerors who believe that might makes right. We've encountered others, beings of pure malice who saw all life as either slaves to be broken or resources to be consumed. They taught us that sometimes peace can only be preserved by those willing to wage war." The room fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. Engineer Koss, who had been quietly monitoring the new systems integration, looked up from his workstation. "You're saying humanity has fought others like this, and won? Won, lost, learned, and grown stronger," the Admiral confirmed. "Each conflict taught us something new about the nature of evil and the price of freedom. We discovered that the universe doesn't care about good intentions, only good results. So we made ourselves capable of delivering those results." Through the conference room's new transparent aluminum windows, They could see the retribution hanging in space like a sleeping giant. Its massive bulk was surrounded by smaller human vessels, destroyers, cruisers, and support ships that had arrived during the past few days. Each one was a masterpiece of engineering that made conventional starships look like toys. "How many others are out there?" Zara asked. "How many humans ships like yours?" Admiral Chen's smile held secrets. "Enough. When humanity decided to take its place among the stars, we didn't do it halfway. Every human world, every colony, every space station is protected by guardians who take their responsibilities very seriously." Young Yorth entered the conference room, his fur now restored to its natural golden color thanks to the human medical treatments. He carried a data pad containing reports from across the galaxy. "Captain, we're receiving transmissions from everywhere. Word of what happened here is spreading through every free world, every resistance cell, every being who still fights against hegemony expansion." He activated the pad, and suddenly the room filled with voices from across the galaxy. Survivors of hegemony attacks expressing hope for the first time in months. Resistance leaders asking if the rumors were true, if humanity had really arrived to join the fight. Entire planetary governments offering alliance and friendship to these mysterious guardians who had appeared from Earth's distant system. "They want to know if you're real," Yorth continued, his voice filled with wonder. "If humanity will really stand with them against the hegemony. If the age of hiding and running is finally over." Admiral Chen stood and moved to the window, her hands clasped behind her back as she gazed out at the stars. "The hegemony has been expanding for 3 years, conquering everything in their path. They've grown used to facing enemies who fight alone, who have no one to call upon when the darkness comes. They've forgotten what it means to face a united galaxy." She turned back to face the room, her expression carrying the weight of command and the fire of determination. "But they're about to remember. Humanity didn't come to this part of the galaxy to conquer or to claim territory. We came because we heard the call of beings like you, people willing to stand for something greater than themselves, even when it seemed hopeless." Dr. Naya's patches pulsed with excitement. "You mean you're staying? You're going to fight the hegemony?" "We're going to do more than that," Admiral Chen said, her voice carrying a promise that resonated through the room. "We're going to remind them what happens when you threaten the innocent, and we're going to show every free being in this galaxy that they're not alone." Over the next few hours, Zara watched as the conference room transformed into something she had never imagined possible, a nerve center for galactic resistance. Human communications officers worked alongside representatives from dozens of worlds, coordinating relief efforts, sharing intelligence, and planning operations that would have been impossible for any single species to attempt. The humans brought more than just superior technology. They brought hope. Their very presence proved that the hegemony could be stopped, that their seemingly unstoppable advance could not only be halted, but reversed. More importantly, they brought a philosophy that resonated with every being who still believed in freedom. "We have a saying in humanity," Admiral Chen explained during one of their planning sessions. "No one fights alone. It doesn't matter if you're human or not. If you stand for something good, if you're willing to risk everything to protect the innocent, then you're family. And family protects family." Lieutenant Vex looked up from her analysis of hegemony fleet movements. "The intercepted communications suggest they're regrouping. Admiral Koreth's death has caused panic in their command structure, but they're adapting. They're calling for reinforcements from the core worlds." "Let them come," Admiral Chen said calmly. "The more forces they commit to this campaign, the fewer they have to threaten peaceful worlds elsewhere. Sometimes the best way to protect everyone is to make yourself such an attractive target that the enemy has no choice but to focus on you." Engineer Koss paused in his system diagnostics. "You're using yourselves as bait." "We're making ourselves available," the Admiral corrected. "There's a difference. Bait is helpless. We're anything but helpless." As if to emphasize her point, alerts began sounding across the station's new sensor array. Long-range detectors had picked up massive hyperspace signatures approaching the system. Not one fleet, but several, converging from different directions, like the closing jaws of a trap. "Hegemony reinforcements," Lieutenant Vex reported, her voice tight with tension. 47 ships total, including 5 heavy dreadnoughts. They're not taking any chances this time." Zara felt her stomach drop. Even with the station's new defenses and the human warship's incredible power, those odds seemed impossible. 47 ships against one, no matter how advanced, felt like madness. But Admiral Chen merely smiled. "Perfect timing. Lieutenant Morrison, signal the fleet." The human communications officer nodded and began transmitting on frequencies Zara didn't recognize. Within moments, space around the Retribution began to shimmer and distort as new ships dropped out of hyperspace. Not just one or two, but dozens. A fleet of human warships that dwarfed even the massive Retribution. Each ship was unique, bearing the scars and decorations of countless battles fought in distant systems. There were sleek destroyers that moved like living things, massive carriers whose fighter bays glowed with contained energy, and dreadnoughts that made the hegemony's largest vessels look like children's toys. "Allow me to introduce the Third Fleet of the Terran Federation," Admiral Chen said with evident pride. "Veterans of the Void War, the Synthesis Conflict, and a dozen other campaigns you've probably never heard of. They've been waiting just outside the system for the hegemony to show their hand." Zara could only stare in amazement as more ships continued to arrive. The human fleet wasn't just large, it was overwhelming. Each vessel radiated the confident power of a species that had learned to fight wars against enemies that defied imagination and had emerged victorious. "How many?" she whispered. "Enough to send a message," Admiral Chen replied. "The hegemony has spent 3 years teaching the galaxy to fear them. Today, they learn what it means to be afraid." As the opposing fleets moved into position for what would surely be the most decisive battle in galactic history, Zara realized that everything had changed. The age of hegemony expansion was over. The age of hiding and hoping for mercy had ended. Humanity had arrived not as conquerors, but as brothers and sisters to all who chose to stand for something greater than themselves. And as she watched the human ships take their positions with practiced precision, Captain Zara Thek knew that the galaxy would never be the same. The darkness was about to learn what happened when giants woke up angry and found their family under threat. The hegemony had made their choice when they decided that might made right. Now they were about to discover that humanity had made a different choice entirely, and that all the might in the galaxy couldn't stand against beings who fought not for conquest, but for each other. The final lesson was about to begin.